Ella sat on the cold stone floor, staring at the sealed door. The symbols that had once glowed with such ferocity were now dark and dormant, as if the life had been drained from them. The shattered fragments of the crimson key glinted faintly at her feet, a cruel reminder of the decision she had made. She had stopped the darkness from escaping. She had done what George Sanderson could not. But now the house was hers. The weight of that realization settled over her like a shroud. She felt tethered to the place in a way that was both impossible and undeniable, as if the very walls of the house had reached out and claimed her. "You've bound yourself to it," a voice said, startling her. Ella scrambled to her feet, her flashlight trembling in her grip as she spun around. Standing at the edge of the chamber was the man from the mirror, his form flickering faintly, as though he were struggling to hold himself together. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice sharp with fear and exhaustion. The man smiled faintly, his expression weary. "I warned you this would happen." Ella's jaw tightened. "You told me to destroy the fragment. You told me this was the only way to stop it." "And it was," he said, stepping closer. "But stopping it comes with a price. You've become the house's new keeper." Her stomach churned. "What does that mean? What happens now?" The man sighed, his flickering form growing dimmer. "It means the house is yours to control. But it's also your responsibility. The darkness beneath it isn't gone, it's only contained. And the house will demand things from you to keep it that way." Ella felt a surge of anger and fear rise within her. "I didn't ask for this. I don't want this." His expression hardened. "Neither did I. Neither did Lillian. Neither did anyone who came before you. But that doesn't matter. The house doesn't care what you want." She took a step back, shaking her head. "No. There has to be another way. I can't." "You don't have a choice," he interrupted, his voice firm. "You made your decision when you sealed that door. Now you're part of the house, whether you like it or not." The air in the chamber grew colder, the faint whispers returning like a distant wind. The man glanced around, his face tightening. "I can't stay much longer," he said. "The house won't let me." Ella's chest tightened. "Wait. You can't just leave me here. Tell me what to do, how to fix this." He gave her a sad smile. "There's nothing to fix. You'll learn, the way we all did. The house will teach you." His form began to fade, the light around him dimming. "Wait!" Ella cried, reaching out toward him. "Who are you? Why are you still here?" The man hesitated, his flickering form stabilizing for a brief moment. "My name was Isaac," he said softly. "I was the first. The one George bound to the house to start it all." Ella's breath caught in her throat. "The first? Then why didn't you stop him?" Isaac's expression darkened. "Because I didn't know what I was becoming. By the time I understood, it was too late." His form dissolved completely, leaving Ella alone in the chamber once more. Hours later, Ella emerged from the basement, her body heavy with exhaustion. The house was eerily quiet, the air no longer charged with malice or fear. But it didn't feel safe. It felt watchful. She wandered through the rooms, the flashlight dangling limply in her hand. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the walls, felt like the house trying to communicate with her. She didn't know if it was anger or approval, but she could feel its presence in every corner. In the living room, she sank onto the couch, her head in her hands. She had come to Black Harbor for a fresh start, a chance to escape the pain of her past. Now she was bound to a house filled with secrets, a house that demanded something she didn't fully understand. Her phone buzzed again. Another unknown message. "The house knows you. It will test you. Be ready." Ella stared at the screen, her hands trembling. The words felt more like a warning than advice. She glanced around the room, half expecting the house to respond, but it remained silent. "What do you want from me?" she whispered, her voice breaking. The silence deepened, and then she felt it, a faint warmth beneath her hand. She looked down and saw that her fingers had brushed against the diary she'd left on the coffee table. Lillian Sanderson's diary. With a sense of dread, Ella opened it again, flipping to the final pages. There, scrawled in handwriting that was frantic and uneven, was a single sentence that sent a chill through her entire body. The house gives and the house takes. Do not fail it. That night, Ella dreamed of the house. She saw its walls stretching endlessly, corridors spiraling into darkness, doors opening and closing on their own. She saw faces, countless faces, staring at her from the shadows, their eyes filled with pain and desperation. And in the center of it all was the sealed door, glowing faintly with a crimson light. When she woke, her heart was pounding, her skin damp with sweat. The house was quiet, but she knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. It was waiting. The house didn't wait long. By morning, Ella could feel it stirring. The oppressive silence had been replaced by a faint hum, a vibration that seemed to emanate from the very bones of the house. She wandered through its rooms, uneasy, her footsteps echoing in the empty hallways. The air felt heavier than before, thick with expectation. It wasn't just a place anymore. The house was alive. Ella stopped in the dining room, drawn by a strange sensation. The table, once covered in dust and cobwebs, was now clean and polished. A single object rested at its center, an envelope, its edges worn and yellowed with age. Ella approached it cautiously, her pulse quickening. The envelope bore no address or name, but the wax seal pressed into its flap was unmistakable, a symbol she had seen carved into the chest and etched into the door of the chamber below. Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. To the keeper, it began. You have taken the house's burden, and with it, the responsibility to maintain the balance. The darkness beneath must remain sealed, but the house requires sustenance to keep it so. You will be its conduit, its caretaker, and its servant. In return, the house will offer you protection, power, and knowledge beyond the reach of mortal minds. Refuse this pact, and the seal will break. All that lies within will be unleashed. Ella's breath caught in her throat. She read the letter again, hoping she had misunderstood. But the words remained the same, their meaning clear. The house wanted a deal. What kind of sustenance? She whispered, though she already suspected the answer. The air grew colder, as though the house had heard her. The letter slipped from her hands and fluttered to the floor. A faint whisper echoed in her ears, its tone low and insistent. Blood binds. Sacrifice sustains. Ella stumbled back, her mind reeling. The whispers grew louder, filling the room until they became a chorus, overlapping and discordant. No, she shouted, clutching her head. I won't do it. I won't. The whispers stopped abruptly, replaced by a single voice. It was calm and measured, yet it carried an edge of finality. You already have? Ella's blood ran cold. What does that mean? She demanded. But the house didn't answer. She spent the rest of the day trying to avoid the house's pull. She wandered through the overgrown garden, sat by the cliffs overlooking the ocean, anything to escape the oppressive feeling that the walls were closing in on her. But no matter where she went, the weight of the house stayed with her. By evening, exhaustion had driven her back inside. She sat in the living room, staring at the fire she had lit to chase away the chill. The flames danced and crackled, but they brought no warmth. Her phone buzzed, the sound jarring in the quiet room. She picked it up, hesitating before looking at the screen. The house demands a sacrifice. Ella dropped the phone as though it had burned her. She backed away, her chest tightening with panic. No, she whispered. I won't do it. You can't make me. The house responded with a creak of floorboards, a groaning sound that seemed to come from deep within its foundation. The fire in the hearth flickered and dimmed, casting long, distorted shadows across the walls. Ella's phone buzzed again. She didn't want to look, but her gaze was drawn to it, as if compelled by an unseen force. You've already chosen. He's coming. A knock at the front door made her jump. The sound was sharp and deliberate, echoing through the house. Ella froze, her heart pounding. She glanced at the clock. It was nearly midnight. No one should have been at her door. The knock came again, louder this time. Her feet moved before her mind could stop them, carrying her to the door. Her hand hovered over the doorknob, trembling. Who is it? she called, her voice barely above a whisper. There was no answer, only the faint sound of the wind. Ella swallowed hard and opened the door. A man stood on the porch, his dark coat dripping with rain. His face was partially hidden beneath the brim of his hat, but his eyes, sharp and piercing, caught the dim light from the doorway. "Ella Monroe?" he asked, his voice calm but edged with urgency. She nodded slowly, gripping the doorframe for support. "Who are you?" The man removed his hat, revealing short-cropped hair and a face marked with faint scars. "My name is Carter," he said. "I know what you've done, and I'm here to help you fix it." Ella's mind raced. "What are you talking about? How do you know about the house?" Carter stepped closer, his expression grim. "Because it's not the first time this has happened. And if we don't stop it now, it won't be the last." Carter sat across from Ella in the living room, his coat slung over the back of a chair. The fire had been stoked again, its warm glow casting flickering shadows across his face. "You've felt it already, haven't you?" he asked, his gaze steady. "The pull, the whispers, the hunger." Ella nodded reluctantly. "The house wants a sacrifice. It says it needs blood to keep the seal intact." Carter leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "That's how it survives. The house feeds on fear, on pain, on lives cut short. It's how it keeps the darkness contained. But it's not just about feeding, it's about control. The more you give in, the more it owns you." Ella's stomach twisted. "How do I stop it? How do I get out of this?" Carter's jaw tightened. "It's not that simple. The house chose you for a reason. You can't just walk away. But there's a way to weaken it, to break its hold." "How?" He hesitated, his expression dark. "You have to sever its connection to the past. The souls it's bound here, the ones it's using to fuel its power, you need to set them free." Ella's breath caught. "You mean Lillian, Isaac, all of them?" Carter nodded. "And the house won't let them go without a fight." Ella glanced toward the darkened hallway, where the basement door loomed like a mouth waiting to swallow her whole. She felt the house watching, listening, waiting for her next move. She clenched her fists, steeling herself. "Then let's fight." Carter's words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of what Ella knew they meant. The house had woven its tendrils around her, binding her to its will, its whispers, its hunger. And now she was being asked to unravel it, to fight against the thing that had claimed her. "How do I free them?" Ella asked, her voice trembling. "How do I set them free?" Carter leaned back, his expression grave. "You'll have to confront the house where it's strongest. The souls it's bound, their pain, their fear, are the foundation of its power. To break the house's hold, you need to release them from whatever's keeping them tied here. That means going deeper into the house than you've gone before." Ella swallowed hard. "Deeper than the basement?" He nodded. "The basement is just the beginning. There's more beneath it, layers of the house that George built to hide what he was doing. The souls are trapped there, each one bound by something specific, a memory, a regret, a secret. You'll have to face them, understand them, and help them let go." The thought chilled Ella to her core. The house had already shown her glimpses of its horrors, but Carter was talking about something far more intimate, more personal. She would have to walk into the heart of the house's darkness and confront the lives it had destroyed. "And if I can't?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Carter's jaw tightened. "Then the house wins, and you'll become just another piece of its story." That night, Ella stood in front of the basement door, her heart pounding like a drumbeat in her ears. Carter was behind her, his presence a steady anchor in the suffocating tension of the house. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" he asked. Ella glanced back at him, her hand resting on the doorknob. "No," she admitted. "But I don't think I ever will be." With a deep breath, she turned the knob and pushed the door open. The familiar creak of the stairs greeted her, but this time, the darkness below seemed thicker, more alive. The air was colder, the scent of damp earth and decay stronger than before. Together, they descended into the basement, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. The remnants of the chest were still there, the splintered wood and ash scattered across the floor. But the sealed door, the one Ella had locked with the crimson key, seemed different. The symbols etched into its surface glowed faintly, pulsing with an unnatural light. "The door knows," Carter said quietly. "It can feel what you're about to do." Ella approached it cautiously, the air around her growing heavier with each step. Her hand trembled as she reached out, her fingers brushing against the cool surface of the door. It swung open without resistance. Beyond it was a tunnel, narrow and lined with rough stone. The whispers that had plagued Ella since her first night in the house returned, louder now, their voices overlapping in a chaotic symphony. She exchanged a glance with Carter, who nodded, and together they stepped into the darkness. The first chamber they entered was small, its walls covered in strange, glowing markings that seemed to shift and writhe like living things. At the center of the room stood a figure, a woman, her back to them, her long dark hair flowing like ink in water. "Lillian," Ella whispered. The figure turned slowly, and Ella's breath caught. It was Lillian Sanderson, just as she had appeared in the photographs and the mirror, but her eyes were hollow, her face etched with sorrow. "You shouldn't be here," Lillian said, her voice soft but filled with a strange echo, as though she were speaking from a great distance. Ella stepped forward, her flashlight trembling in her hand. "Lillian, I'm here to help you. To free you." Lillian's hollow gaze fixed on her. "Free me? There's no freedom here. The house doesn't let go." "That's not true," Carter said, stepping beside Ella. "The house wants you to believe that, but it's a lie. You can leave. You just have to let go of what's keeping you here." Lillian's expression twisted, a flicker of anger flashing across her face. "Let go? Do you know what I lost? What this house took from me?" The chamber seemed to respond to her rage, the walls trembling, the glowing markings flaring brighter. Ella braced herself, her mind racing. "What did you lose, Lillian?" she asked gently. Lillian's shoulders sagged, her anger giving way to despair. "My family," she said, her voice breaking. "My mother. My sister. The house took them. I stayed because I thought I could save them, but it was a lie. They were already gone." Ella's throat tightened. "Lillian, you've been holding on to that guilt, that pain, for so long. But it's not your fault. You didn't fail them. The house did." Lillian's form flickered, her image becoming translucent. The markings on the walls dimmed slightly, the tension in the air easing. "Let go," Carter said, his voice steady. "You don't have to carry this anymore. It's time to move on." Tears streamed down Lillian's face as she nodded. Her form began to dissolve, fading into a soft glow that filled the chamber with warmth. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice echoing as she disappeared. The room fell silent, the oppressive weight lifting. Ella turned to Carter, her heart still racing. "One down," he said. "But there are more. The house won't make it easy." Ella nodded, steeling herself. She didn't know how many more souls were bound to the house or how much darker the path would become, but she knew one thing. She wasn't stopping until the house released them all. "Let's keep going," she said, stepping into the next tunnel. The tunnels beneath the house seemed endless, a maze of twisting passageways carved into the earth. The air grew colder with each step Ella and Carter took, the whispers growing louder and more fragmented. They weren't just words anymore. They were screams, laughter, cries of pain. The cacophony pressed against Ella's mind, making her head throb. "This isn't just a house," she muttered, her voice barely audible over the noise. "It's something else entirely. It's alive." Carter nodded grimly. The house was built to contain what George unleashed. But over time it became part of it. Now it's more than just wood and stone. It's a predator, feeding off everything it traps inside. Ella shuddered. She had felt that hunger since the moment she stepped through the front door, but hearing it spoken aloud made it more real, more terrifying. The tunnel opened into another chamber, larger than the last. The walls were covered in jagged carvings, each one depicting scenes of torment and despair. At the center of the room stood another figure, this one a man with a gaunt face and hollow eyes. His hands were bound in chains that glowed faintly, the links pulsing with a sickly green light. "Who is he?" Ella asked, her voice trembling. Carter stepped closer, his expression darkening. "Isaac. He was George's assistant, the one who helped him perform the first ritual. The house has kept him here ever since, using his soul to strengthen the seal." Isaac turned his head slowly, his empty gaze locking onto Ella. "You've come to take my place," he said, his voice a rasp. Ella flinched. "No, I'm here to free you." A bitter laugh escaped Isaac's cracked lip. "Free me? I'm the anchor. Without me, the seal weakens. You think the house will let you release me without a price?" Ella hesitated, her chest tightening. She glanced at Carter, but his expression was unreadable. Isaac's voice grew louder, more desperate. "You don't understand. The house isn't just holding me, it's feeding on me. On my guilt, my shame. If you take me out of this place, it will demand something else. Something stronger." Ella's stomach churned. She thought of the letter she had found, its cryptic warning about sacrifice and sustenance. "There has to be another way," she said, her voice shaking. Isaac laughed again, the sound hollow. "There's always another way. But it's never the one you want." Carter stepped forward, his jaw tight. "Isaac, you've been here long enough. Let us take your place." Isaac's eyes flared with sudden anger. "You think I want to be here? Do you think I want this? You can't comprehend the weight of this place. The way it clings to you, burrows into your soul. If you set me free, it'll latch onto someone else. Someone like her." His gaze shifted to Ella, and her blood ran cold. The air in the chamber grew heavier, pressing down on Ella like a physical force. The glowing chains around Isaac's wrists pulsed faster, their light illuminating the carvings on the walls. Carter moved closer to Ella, his voice low. "We have to break the chains. It's the only way to free him." "But what happens after that?" Ella asked. Carter didn't answer. She looked at Isaac, his hollow eyes filled with anger and despair. "If I set you free, will the house come after me?" Isaac didn't respond immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, almost resigned. "It already has?" Ella's chest tightened. She glanced at Carter, then back at Isaac. "I don't care what it takes. I'm ending this." She stepped forward, ignoring the way the air seemed to thicken around her, and reached for the glowing chains. The moment her fingers touched them, a surge of energy shot through her, forcing her to her knees. Images flooded her mind, scenes of George's ritual, the moment Isaac was bound, the years of torment he had endured. The house's voice rose above it all, a thunderous roar that echoed in her skull. "No. He is mine." Ella gritted her teeth, fighting against the house's will. She could feel it trying to push her away, to break her resolve, but she held on, digging her nails into the glowing chains. "Help me!" she shouted, her voice strained. Carter rushed forward, gripping the chains beside her. Together, they pulled with all their strength. The chains resisted, their glow intensifying, but then they snapped with a deafening crack. Isaac fell to the ground, his body trembling as the chains dissolved into light. The house roared in fury, the walls of the chamber shaking violently. Ella staggered to her feet, her head pounding. She looked down at Isaac, who stared up at her with wide, disbelieving eyes. You did it," he whispered. But Ella could feel it. The house wasn't done. The air around them twisted, the whispers returning with a vengeance. "What now?" she asked, turning to Carter. His expression was grim. "The house is going to demand something else. It always does." As if in response, the chamber began to shift, the walls closing in around them. A new door appeared at the far end of the room, its surface carved with symbols that glowed faintly red. Isaac's voice was faint. "That's where it ends. Where it always ends." Ella's legs felt like lead, but she forced herself to move toward the door. She didn't know what lay beyond it, but she knew one thing. She had made her choice. And she wasn't turning back. The door loomed before Ella, its surface pulsating with faint red light, like a living heartbeat. The symbols carved into it writhed and shifted as though they were alive, reacting to her presence. Each step closer felt like a battle against an invisible force, the house pushing back, desperate to stop her. Carter followed in silence, his face grim and resolute. Behind them, Isaac stood, his form flickering like a flame caught in a gust of wind. The house's whispers rose again, louder and more insistent, warning Ella to turn back. But she didn't. She reached out and placed her hand on the door. The carvings flared brightly, bathing the room in crimson light, and then the door swung open with a deafening groan. Beyond it was a vast, circular chamber, its walls covered in countless symbols and carvings that seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness above. At the center of the room was a raised platform, and atop it stood an altar made of the same blackened stone as the chest she had destroyed. Ella stepped inside, the oppressive energy of the room pressing down on her like a physical weight. Carter followed close behind, his hand resting on the hilt of the knife he had drawn. Isaac remained at the threshold, his expression a mixture of relief and fear. "This is it," Carter said. "The heart of the house." Ella moved toward the altar, her steps slow and deliberate. The air around it seemed to hum with power, the whispers transforming into a low, guttural chant. On the altar lay a book, its cover worn and cracked, the pages glowing faintly with an eerie red light. "The book," Isaac said from the doorway, his voice trembling. "That's where it all began. George's ritual, his binding, it's all in there." Ella hesitated, her hand hovering over the book. She could feel the energy radiating from it, raw and untamed. "What do I do?" she asked, turning to Carter. "You destroy it," Carter said, his voice steady. "The book is the house's core. Without it, the bindings will collapse. The souls will be freed." "And the darkness?" Ella asked, her chest tightening. Carter's jaw tightened. "It will be weakened. But it won't disappear. It's too old, too powerful. The best we can do is break its connection to this place." Ella swallowed hard, her mind racing. If she destroyed the book, she could free the souls trapped in the house, including Isaac, Lillian, and Carter. But the darkness would remain, waiting for another chance to rise. She reached for the book, but the house reacted instantly. The chamber shook violently, cracks spreading across the walls as the symbols flared brighter. A shadowy figure rose from the floor, its form towering and amorphous, its red eyes glowing with malice. "You will not take it from me," the figure roared, its voice reverberating through the chamber. Ella stumbled back as the figure lunged toward her, but Carter stepped in front of her, his knife flashing in the crimson light. He slashed at the shadow, the blade slicing through its form and scattering it like smoke. "Do it now," Carter shouted. "Destroy the book." Ella surged forward, her hands closing around the book. The moment she touched it, a surge of energy shot through her, burning her skin and filling her mind with visions. George's ritual, the souls he had bound, the darkness he had awakened. The house screamed in protest, its voice a cacophony of rage and despair. The shadowy figure reformed, slamming into Carter and sending him crashing into the wall. "Ella!" Carter yelled, his voice strained. "End it!" Tears streamed down her face as she gripped the book and raised it over her head. The house roared, the ground beneath her shaking violently, but she didn't stop. With all her strength, she slammed the book down onto the altar, the impact shattering the stone and sending a shockwave through the chamber. The book burst into flames, its pages consumed by fire, and the symbols on the walls dimmed one by one. The shadowy figure let out a final, agonized scream before it dissolved into nothingness. The silence that followed was deafening. Ella fell to her knees, her chest heaving as she struggled to catch her breath. The chamber was still now, the oppressive energy gone. She looked around, her eyes searching for Carter and Isaac. Carter staggered to his feet, his face bruised but determined. Isaac stood near the doorway, his form flickering faintly, his expression one of relief. "You did it," Carter said, his voice filled with quiet awe. Ella looked at him, her exhaustion evident. "Is it over?" Carter hesitated, then nodded. "The house's hold is broken. The souls are free." Isaac stepped forward, his gaze softening as he looked at Ella. "You've given us peace," he said. "Thank you." Ella felt tears welling in her eyes as Isaac's form dissolved into light, his soul finally released from the house's grasp. But as the chamber began to collapse around them, Carter grabbed her arm. "We have to go." Ella nodded, forcing herself to her feet. Together, they ran back through the tunnels, the house groaning and shaking as it began to crumble. When they finally emerged into the open air, the house behind them shuddered and caved in on itself, its walls collapsing in a cloud of dust and debris. Ella stood in the garden, staring at the ruins of the house that had nearly consumed her. For the first time, the air felt light, free of the oppressive weight that had haunted her since she arrived. Carter stood beside her, his expression unreadable. "What happens now?" Ella asked softly. Carter glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "We move forward. You saved them, Ella. And you saved yourself?" But as Ella turned back to the ruins, she couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness wasn't truly gone. It was out there, waiting, watching. And she knew it would come again,